Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to look at flooding and also how to control flooding. Floods can be caused by various things. You can have weather events that have tons of water that comes from a storm, for instance. A hurricane will bring ridiculous amounts of rain in that can't be handled by the drainage system in the city or the river system around that region. Or you could have melting snow or other things naturally that occurs. You could also have disasters where dams or levees break. So we're going to look at the causes of floods, and then if you were going to try to prevent a flood, what would you do if you were a city planner in order to try to prevent a flood from happening? So a flood is just when you have more water flowing in a stream than the stream can handle. So either the amount of water is due to the weather. Okay, so you have huge water events, rain events or storm events, or you have melting snow. Okay, so you have, let's say, lots of snow in the mountains, but yet a ridiculously a heat wave that goes through in the spring, and everything melts, and so you just have water rushing down mountains. So a lot of times a flood is simply the stream bed can't handle the amount of water that it's there. So if you have a river that's flooded many times, then there is a flood plain usually around a river. So as the river meanders back and forth, that water will, every time it floods, go into that area. So it would be probably a good idea that you didn't have huge cities built right along the edge of a floodplain, but of course everyone wants to live next to the river, so it happens, and you have cities that are flooded every several years along the Mississippi or other huge rivers in the world. Okay, so dams can be caused by natural events, or of course, if you have had flood control before, say a dam has built and you make a lake where the water is sitting behind a dam, and so you can control the water so it doesn't flood very often. What if that dam were to break? Well, then all the water would come out immediately and you would have an enormous flood. So lots of different reasons for them. Two pictures of the same region in the Mississippi River, one showing swollen rivers where all of that water is trying to come down the river at the same time, and it just wasn't built for it. And so it flows out over its banks and basically floods that whole area. You've got these various colors are talking, I believe, about population density. So much of where this is flooded is over people's houses, so there would be lots of destruction here. If you're going to control flooding, a lot of times you will mimic the same thing that happens when levees are built naturally. Okay, as the banks of a river gets higher and higher and higher, every time it floods, the banks get higher. Well, if you could build an artificial levee around a river, then that river would have to be high enough to go over the levee in order for it to flood. Or in the case of a levee breaking, it would be the same thing where you would have a flood. Hurricane Katrina was devastating to New Orleans, not just because of the rain and the wind of the hurricane, but one of the levees broke along the Mississippi River and flooded an entire section of New Orleans. And it was just horrible for that reason. The water was all up to the roofs of thousands of houses. So you can build dams to where you have lakes that didn't exist there. They were just river valleys, and then the whole river valley floods because you've built a dam in the river, and you end up with a lake, which can be awesome for recreation, and at the same time you can control flooding. So it's a kind of a win-win, except for the poor people that lived under where the water is, but they usually move before they flood it. And then there's also efforts that you can do non-structurally to avoid flooding, and a lot of that has to do with stopping erosion along the banks of the river. So here's a poor, beautiful looking farm where the levee, which was an embankment on the side of the river, broke, and the river essentially comes into a person's yard, and that's pretty dramatic and probably ruined their day.